So I'm enjoying my tomato sandwich. Half done here. And today's video is about this guy who thinks that the monuments around Giza are designed to mimic the stars as they were aligned in the sky in the past, and he's pointing out different things about possible burial rituals and suggesting different times and dates and everything. And the controversy comes up in that the proposals that he's making suggest unorthodox dating for these monuments that would seem more or less impossible based on what we think we know about the agricultural revolution. I talked a little bit before about the Sahara. I think there's a lot there that's less clear than we think. That's about all I'm going to say about that. What I'd rather do is talk about the idea of talk about why it is that the stars seem so central to ancient religious practices. It is curious, isn't it? What I'm going to say is that I think that ideas about contacts with other life forms from other places are as least as good a theory of the origin of God as any other. I mean, this is a hard question, right? Why did we invent a God? What did we, and I mean, there's these anthropological theories, and people hold to them very closely, and it's all very ironic because, they operate as though the theories that they follow are religion themselves, right? So, we no longer have the theory of God that we unquestionably follow. We have theories about the theory of God that we unquestionably follow. It's not progress, right? And I mean, they're not satisfying really when you break them down. They don't really seem to develop much depth or insight, which does not logically imply therefore aliens. Your theory sucks, therefore aliens. That's not maybe not the best argument that you can come up with, right? But certainly your theory sucks, therefore you should be open-minded. Is pretty good, and I think in this context, not just pretty good, but essentially inescapable. There's not really a lot that can be. I think it's necessary to come to terms with, come face to face with the with how lacking our theories are about the origins of God. And I think one of the things that needs to be done to kind of get towards that is to ensure that people that study this do not have religious beliefs. It's a huge problem. One example of this manifesting itself is that there is a archaeologist by the name of Colin Renfrew who has attempted to overturn the accepted theory of Indo-European origins by arguing for what is essentially a flood story. I guess I'm tying this back to before, which would be bad enough. But I mean, the guy is also a very openly and outspoken fundamentalist Christian. So when you have some person who is extremely involved with, these religious organizations, and then they present a theory that upholds what's written in these texts, or does so using cryptic language that is very clearly um, designed to have other people draw that conclusion. It draws a lot of question as to the viability of that research, and the credibility of the author. And I know that this is going to a lot of people are going to be shocked to be saying this, saying that Colin Renfrew does not have any credibility as a researcher because he's a religious person. You know, people will throw their arms up in the air and say, you're persecuting somebody based on their religion, but it's absolutely accurate. And the flip side of that problem is that when so you have this religious fundamentalist, they create a theory about human origins, or in this case, origins of a specific. He's looking at linguistic origins, really, and he's trying to tie it towards it's a combination flood Babel myth. Maybe it's actually more like the Tower of Babel, right, where you had all of the languages develop essentially in the same place where the Garden of Eden was, and then they're scattered just like in the Bible. And then your audience is composed of Christians at a Christian school, by professors that failed people if they didn't uphold and it's a system, right? And then all of a sudden you don't have a system of science that's looking for actual answers using evidence. Instead, you have a theological, a seminary, masquerading as a science institution. And again, I know people are going to flip out at this, because they will present the exact same arguments towards what they're trying to overturn. Well, not the religious part of it, anyways. But they'll come up with racial arguments that are largely nonsense. But again, they're based on theories that are upheld by and you have this system, right? How did I get there? I gotta go back and look at that and see where I was. No, because I got to that point for a reason. Just talking about. Damn it. Okay, I'm gonna turn this off for a minute and come back. Okay, I didn't actually check it, but if I remember correctly, I think I was just trying to suggest that if we're to look into the origins of why it is that we created religion, then we want to ensure that the people that do so are not religious. See that's I mean, you can see where this is going to create a lot of controversy, right? And why it's so much easier just to ignore it, and focus on people's work instead of their beliefs. But like I say, when it becomes systemic, then there isn't anybody doing that except people on the outside, and then the people on the outside aren't, they're denied their credentials specifically so that they're not taken seriously, right? And of course, I'm a conspiracy theorist, but it's whether it's a centralized plan or not, and I'm not suggesting it is, or it's just the nature of cults. It's how a cult is. It's what a cult does. It's pretty clear that that's what actually tends to happen, right? So it certainly where did this idea of a god come from? Why is it the way it is? And let's make sure that when we look at this, in order to be properly objective, we need to have that distance, right? That's really all I'm saying, is that you need distance. And if you don't have that distance, then you can't really interpret things properly. Like this Colin Renfrew character, who would not be able to... See, this is how the religious mind works, right? What's written in Scripture is true, therefore all evidence must uphold what's written in Scripture. So you're not looking at evidence and having, the evidence create a story. You are accepting a story as for granted, and then you're looking at how it is that you can construct the evidence to uphold your story, right? And that's not science. That's, I mean, I suppose I'm providing a critical theory of science, right? Um, as critical race theory or critical legal theory, that's really what I'm doing, right? Is I'm pointing out that, okay, you know, science is supposed to work. You got evidence, you build your ideas, but in practice, a lot of the time you often have a theory, and then you look for evidence to uphold your theory, meaning you've already made up your mind before you start digging. And the biggest factor there is the religious part of it. And no, it doesn't work the other way too. Um, let's not even have that. Why don't you just not say that so I don't have to laugh at you? How about that? Okay, so one of the most interesting things I've seen in regard to this is I saw a video um, of some humans in helicopters descending on elephants, um, sedating them, performing surgery on them, and then letting them run off because they had a broken tusk or some other such thing. Um, so we're talking about like doctors and helicopters flying over the savannah and descending on elephants and fixing them up. Elephants are pretty smart. Um, they might not be that far removed from um, our not so distant ancestors in terms of broad-based intelligence. Some people even think that they have developed somewhat of a language. They have been reported to understand dialects and to treat people that speak different languages differently. Just like remarkable levels of intelligence that are really that there's really no parallel to. What are they thinking when these humans fall on them on helicopters? It's kind of like a spaceship coming down, isn't it? It's hard to imagine that they would have any other reaction. And so if you can imagine a future where we've all but driven ourselves to extinction, or perhaps we've abandoned the planet, we can imagine these elephants um, perceiving us as some kind of superior being, perhaps even a god. Um, Maybe that's more satisfying, even if it's without evidence. So, I don't claim there's any good reason to think that our religious origin stories are a consequence of contact with extraterrestrials. Um, I don't have any evidence I can point to and say this, therefore that. But I do think it's very curious that there's this meme through many cultures. Again, I pointed this out with the flood. We asked the question, if God exists or if there is a God, then why do all of these cultures, interpret that God so differently? If we accept that reasoning, then it does follow that if every culture has a similar perspective, of some specific thing, like a flood, or like creatures coming from the sky, whether we call them angels, or some other thing. The fact that that exists in so many different cultures is maybe evidence for there being something underlying it. I think that at the very least, if you look at religion from that perspective, um, it begins to naturalize. Um, Remember, the purpose of science is to find a natural explanation for seemingly supernatural phenomena, right? It used to be we didn't understand why things fell, and maybe the truth is we still don't, other than saying that, hey, there's this attraction between mass. But at the very least, we have a natural explanation for something that it's mysterious, and so, and on and on. And if we want to understand where God came from, why we have these concepts, then we need a natural explanation for it. And that's the hard part that none of the theories do a good job with. Um, but that the alien contact theory um, does. Um, now, I'm not jumping into any conclusions about DNA experiments or human alien hybrids. I'm not suggesting anything of the sort. I think that the story about the elephants is kind of more along the lines of what I might be thinking, um, and how it might be easy to jump to whatever kinds of conclusions, or even think that maybe they might have trolled us a little bit.